Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the news on Hilaal TV. Let us, of course, start off with the developing story, which, of course, began yesterday. The breaking news that the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his former defense minister Yoav Gallant, and the Hamas military commander. Now, Netanyahu and former defense minister Gallant have been accused of crimes against humanity and war crimes committed from at least October the 8th last year to 20th of May 2024. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome, from a legal aspect of this, Ottilia Maunganidze, who is the head of special projects at the Institute for Security Studies. Ottilia, good day. Thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal TV.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Ottilia, I mean, when we spoke back in May, of course, when we had the panel discussion with Joe Bloon, when the ICJ had, of course, issued measures at that time, we had this discussion with regards to when would this part of the wheels of justice for the arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant, when would it arrive? Of course, we had to wait 6 months for it. This was a long time coming, wasn't it, given the destruction, carnage, and the loss of life that is currently occurring in Gaza?
It was a long time coming. You know, as you said, this is a request for arrest warrants was put forward by the prosecutor in May already. But of course, it's not the prosecutor who issues the arrest warrants. The judges of the pre-trial chamber have to convince themselves also that a case can be made. So now, finally, we have 3 arrest warrants, though, of course, whether or not Mohammed al-Masri is still alive is in question because, of course, Israel has claimed that they killed him earlier this year. So really, the main attention has been on the arrest warrants for the Prime Minister and the former Minister of Defense of Israel for the crimes that have been alleged. And I think what's important here, you mentioned the ICJ case already, is that some of the issues that the ICC will have to contend with, the ICJ has already found in its preliminary orders that at the very least there's evidence that starvation, restriction of humanitarian access, and then also specific targeting of the Palestinian population, that is underway. The task will be the ICC prosecutor to then prove that Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant are 2 of the people that are responsible. These should not be considered to be the only and last arrest warrants that will be issued, just the first.
Ottilia, right. So let's look at what happens if, for example, members of the Rome Statute, and I just saw the countries, there's over 100 of them. If either Gallant or Netanyahu arrives at these respective countries, whoever they are, what is the process? What do their respective justice systems need to do in order for the arrest to occur? Of course, you've heard Switzerland that they would say they would take them to its local justice court. You've heard a number of countries saying that and these, of course, are European countries, that if either one of the 2 arrive in our country, we are compelled by the Rome Statute to go ahead and arrest them. How does that process work? Can you maybe talk to the viewers about that? Because one would think it's not a case of, well, they arrive, you take them in handcuffs. Obviously, there's more of a diplomatic manner of doing it. So could you maybe just delve into that, please, the sort of procedure should they arrive in one of these countries?
Well, first, if I can just take a small step back and reflect on the fact that the majority of Rome Statute countries that implement with the International Criminal Court, European ones in particular, have come out to say, of course, if the 2 would arrive on their territory, they have an obligation to the ICC to arrest and then surrender them to the International Criminal Court. This includes one of the members, Austria, that said they find that the arrest warrants are shocking and surprising. Still, within that statement, they said we have an obligation to the ICC. And I think this really then reflects that the world or the space in which Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant can travel to has really reduced significantly. But what if, like you asked, they were to travel to any one of these countries? Now, the ICC does not have its own police force.
Sure.
That means the police forces of member states, but also non-member states, are the ones that would have to arrest them. Depending on the jurisdiction, the process goes as follows. The person gets arrested. They're immediately then surrendered to the ICC. The ICC statute does not require that formal extradition processes be followed. So most member states would follow what we call an arrest and surrender approach. In other countries, let's use South Africa as an example, an unlikely destination for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, but by way of example, we would have a complementary domestic arrest warrant that would enable the South African police to arrest them. And again, the process that would be followed is an arrest and surrender process. This is a process that requires quick collaboration between our Department of International Relations and the Ministry of Justice. But I have to stress that there is no requirement for a full extradition process, particularly for member states of the Rome Statute. This process would need to be followed in cases where they travel to a non-member state of the Rome Statute. But past experience has shown, for example, Rwanda, that is not a state party to the Rome Statute, is responsible for the arrest and transfer of one suspect in the Congolese matter to the ICC, and they did this without needing to follow formal extradition processes, simply an arrest and a surrender to the court in the shortest possible time to do that.
Ottilia, I know what you've mentioned, of course, is by the book, by the law. Of course, for the layman out there, they would see this as dampening the spirits. Who, of course, wants to see the wheels of justice turning very quickly. It doesn't work that way. And it brings me to the next question, that if, should either Netanyahu or Gallant, or even both of them, have their day at the courts, it's not going to be a 2-week, 3-week supposed trial. This could take years. This may even take a decade for there to be some sort of judgment pass by the panel or the judges that are going to be sitting in the ICC. And we've seen that, of course, Slobodan Milosevic. We've seen that with, of course, leaders of the Rwandan genocide. We've seen that with the Liberian civil war, of course, generals that were, of course, brought in for war crimes. It's going to take a very long time. And I think this is what the public needs to understand, isn't it? That this wheel of justice, as much as what has happened yesterday is quite historic, the end game is very, very long and very, very arduous.
You're correct. And I think it was helpful that the different cases that you cited are all not International Criminal Court cases. These are cases before international criminal tribunals for the former Yugoslavia, for Rwanda, the Special Court for Sierra Leone, for example, and there are other hybrid or international tribunals that have had to deal with this. But why I say it's important is because all of these institutions, like the International Criminal Court, like your local Johannesburg High Court, follow processes requiring investigation, requiring a thorough prosecution, which requires the prosecution to present their case, the defense to present their case, and that calls on calling of witnesses, both to the crimes themselves, but also expert witnesses. And it is only after the testimony of all those people and the evidence has been presented that the trial chamber of the International Criminal Court, these are judges of the court, will then be able to hand down a decision. This can take anything from a year to, like you allude to, even a decade. But what it does do, especially when you have people that are in the top leadership, is it does also mean that there could be a potential deterrent effect. Maybe not for Israeli authorities, if I can be pointed here, but for those countries that are member states of the Rome Statute that have indicated that they would act and support the ICC and its processes, that are also currently perhaps providing some support to Israel. We saw earlier this year that the UK, for example, reduced its arms supply to Israel and removed a number of weapons from its list, arguing that its own Attorney's General office said if these weapons are used in carrying out crimes against humanity or war crimes, that it wouldn't just be the people who directly use them who are held accountable, but also those that export them. So the world, if I can put it that way, in terms of potential support, is much smaller. But we have seen the U.S. statement. The U.S. maintains its support for Israel. And so it really is a case of a larger group of people, a larger group of countries now saying, let justice take its course. And a few, including Israel, including the United States, arguing that justice in this case can only take its toll if Israel is not held accountable, which is in many ways imbalanced, unfair, and would not be what justice calls for.
Ottilia, unfortunately, we have come towards the end of this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having me.
That's Ottilia Maunganidze, who is, of course, the head of special projects at the Institute for Security Studies. Of course, yeah, the wheels of justice, it's going to take long. You've seen that, the cases that, of course, we mentioned earlier on, and the fact that this is not an overnight decision. First of all, Netanyahu and Gallant need to go to countries that, of course, are part of the Rome Statute, and then, the supposed legal aspect of things will kick in.